So you want to hit the pubs in Dublin before attending Oktoberfest in Munich, or sightsee in Madrid or Lisbon on the way home from Paris or Rome. Maybe break up that long flight to Australia or New Zealand with a few nights stay in Tokyo or Honolulu. Some airlines will let you visit two places for the price of one by allowing free stopovers. I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, a contributing editor at checkbook.org.
Welcome to Consumerpedia at checkbook.org. We're the nonprofit that helps consumers select services, avoid trouble, and save money. Because we don't accept any advertising or take money from any business we recommend, you can rely on checkbook.org to be completely independent and objective. Now, here's the host of Consumerpedia, America's consumer expert, the Consumer Man, Herb Weisbaum.
In this episode, a look at the stopover programs offered by the major airlines and how to book them, plus tips for anyone planning to buy a plane ticket. Here with all that, Checkbook's executive editor and frequent flyer, Kevin Brassler.
Hey, Herb.
So for those who don't know, could you explain to us how these stopover programs work?
Yeah, so the airlines that offer these types of fares, they allow you to book a flight from here in the U.S. to its hub airport, and then they let you stay in that hub city for 2 days to a few weeks, depends on the airline, and then you continue onward to your final destination. So instead of a normal itinerary with them where you'd be in the hub for an hour to 8 hours or however long it's going to be and then fly on, oh no, you can actually now leave the airport, spend some time in that area, and you don't have to buy a second ticket to continue your journey. It's just part of your itinerary. So you could book a trip that takes you, say, from the U.S. to Dublin or wherever. You can hang out there for a few days, and then you can book another ticket onward to Italy or Portugal or Timbuktu. But when you do that normally, you're paying the airline for that second ticket. You're paying for one ticket to whatever, Dublin, and then a second ticket onward to the next stop in your trip. But with these free stopover programs, you don't have to do that. You just bake into your ticket essentially a long layover. But, with some airlines, it can last up to a month or more. So that's not a layover anymore. It's what's called a stopover.
So why do the airlines do this? They must get something out of it.
Yeah, well, so most of the airlines that have these programs, they're subsidized by, or even they're outright owned by, their governments. And so, those governments, they want our tourism dollars. And, I think the most well-known program, and I think it was probably the first program, is Icelandairs. I mean, it's very popular, been so for many years. I mean, whoever thought up that program really deserves Iceland's highest medal of honor. The program that they developed there that's still in play is the main reason Iceland became so popular with tourists.
And Deb and I actually did that a few years ago on a trip to London to visit cousin Melvin. We flew Icelandair nonstop to Iceland, spent a few days there, then flew nonstop to London for the same price as if we had flown nonstop from Seattle to Heathrow. It was just fabulous.
Yeah, it's good old Melvin. Yeah, I'm glad you got to see him. I haven't yet booked one of these trips. It just hasn't, worked out well for me. And we'll get into why in a minute. Often we find that these things are more expensive than just booking with an airline that doesn't offer these stopovers. But they are, especially Icelandair's program, it's very popular. We found that other airlines, they have these programs, but they don't widely publicize them.
And Iceland is on the way to most places you're going if you're headed over to Europe, so it works out really well for them.
That's right. I mean, that's really what, why a lot of travelers see this as a favorable thing. I mean, I can get to Iceland and I think it's 3 or 4 hours from here in the Washington area. And it can kind of break up your trip, although keep in mind the flight, when I did connect through Iceland, I didn't stop over. I think it landed at 4:30 a.m. or something. So it wasn't going to be a very, fun first day after getting, 2 hours of sleep on the flight at most.
Right. You found 26 airlines that offer free stopover programs. That's a lot.
Yeah. And so, this isn't the first time I've done this research. I researched and wrote about stopovers. It was about 5 years ago. And at that time, though, I was surprised at how many do it. Because there's only about, between 7 and 10 airlines that really market their programs, that advertise them at all. And I was even more surprised this time around. I really thought that maybe COVID had killed off a lot of these programs, and it for sure killed off a few of the well-known ones. But there are many that are still standing. So it took me a lot of time to do this work. I checked the websites of, it was a little over 100 airlines that serve U.S. airports. And the problem was it wasn't just enough to go on their websites and look for a section on stopovers. Many of the airlines that offer these programs, they do a really lousy job of promoting them. And sometimes I think that might just be on purpose. But, if I couldn't find a program, I still went ahead and dug into their fare rules to see if I could find it there. And if I couldn't find anything on stopovers and the fare rules, I also played around with pricing multi-stop itineraries to see how, a stopover of 2 to 4 days would affect the pricing I saw.
Well, I'm sure our executive editor will be very happy with how much work you did. Oh, you are the executive editor.
That's
Way to go,
right,
Kevin.
Yeah. I thought about delegating, but I just got into it. And at that point, also, I just kind of knew what I was looking for. It's not obvious. A lot of these programs, as I mentioned, they're not very well advertised. And often it's not obvious. You kind of determine what these companies are doing.
So let's name names. Which airlines heavily market their programs and make them easy for me to find and book?
So the ones that were quick for me to grab were Icelandair, as I've mentioned. It makes it easy to book. It's right there on the page. So does Air Canada. You can do stopovers with it in Toronto. Etihad, Iberia, which has stopovers in Madrid. Play Airlines, which is another airline that has its hub in Iceland. Qatar Airways, TAP Air Portugal, which lets you do stopovers in Lisbon or Porto. And then finally, Turkish Airlines. All those airlines have well-pronounced, well-marketed programs. I also found a few smaller carriers have easy-to-book websites with stopovers. Those include Azores Airlines, Copa, Fiji Airways, and Singapore Airlines.
But you also, as you mentioned, found that some airlines make it a real pain to find these fares.
Yeah, I mean, so a few have programs and they mention it on their websites, but you have to actually, pick up the phone and call to book them. I mean, come on, whoever wants to do that these days, right?
Right.
But I found that, Aer Lingus has a program, ITI Airways, which is Italy's national airline, LATAM, which serves a lot of Latin American countries, and Royal Air Maroc. They all have programs, but to book, you got to call. I mean, I guess they're stuck in the 1990s or whatever. And by the way, everyone, good luck calling Royal Air Maroc for anything. I know most people haven't had to call that airline, but I have. I had to pretty recently, and I hope to never have to do so again. There are also a few other airlines where we list their stopover programs, but, I'll acknowledge it may be a pain to book. You may have to, really fiddle around with their websites to make it happen. Ethiopian Airlines, for example, it advertises a program. I called it, and it was just a waste of time. I mean, no one there knew how to book it. The website didn't work for it. Same with Egypt Air. I didn't list either of those two because I figured, well, if I can't figure out a way to book, then our readers won't be able to either. But there were a few others that we list that might be challenges. I think that, with those, especially these smaller airlines, give it a shot. But, don't blame me if you encounter crappy airline customer service, because I get that too. I also found that there are still other airlines that, they sort of hide their stopover programs. Like they exist, they're in the fare rules, but to book, you have to know how to build a multi-stop itinerary on their website. You have to know to do that. So again, on our own website, in our article, we have a list of airlines and we tell you how to book for each airline. It's somewhat different with each carrier.
So as you noted in your story, some airlines don't have official stopover programs at all. They just have traveler-friendly fare rules. Tell us about that.
So this is a lesson I learned 5 years ago when I first looked into this stuff. I mean, I thought, a dozen airlines offer these things because I know about the dozen that market them. But it wasn't just enough to check on, do they have a section of the website? I really had to dig into fare rules. And I also had to just price a bunch of hypothetical trips to see how they played out. And the reason is that, for example, you can't find anything about stopovers on Aeromexico's website. But when I priced itineraries where I'd be flying to Mexico City, staying for 3 or 4 days, and then flying on to a second destination, I found that airline wouldn't charge me extra for that stopover or wouldn't charge me much more at all, like less than $25 or so to do that. And the same was true of several of the earlier airlines we included in our list.
And you found that some airlines do have stopover programs, but barely mention them, which seems strange.
Yeah, I mean, the weirdest is Qantas, is Australian's major airline. And among all the airlines, it probably has the most generous program. It lets you stop anywhere on your way to your final destination. So you can even make 2 or 3 stops in Australia or New Zealand or, Tasmania or wherever. And it won't charge you extra for those stopovers on your way to wherever, Singapore, or wherever it is you're going. So you could hang out in Melbourne or Sydney or Tasmania or all 3 for weeks if you want before flying on to whatever, India or even Europe. But it's weird. I mean, Qantas probably has the best program, but it sort of keeps quiet about it. You have to know to go on its website and book these multi-stop itineraries for the magic to happen. And I don't really have an explanation for that, other than Australians are kind of weird, I guess.
Send your mail to Kevin Brassler if you're listening to us in Australia.
They know they're weird. They live upside down.
That's true. And here's the most important thing to remember. You have to book on the airline's website, right?
Yeah, I mean, kind of bury the lead here a little bit. Yeah, the only way you can book these fares, as far as I know, is by going to the airline's website. If you go onto Kayak and book this type of trip with a 4-day stopover in Iceland or wherever, it's not going to work. You got to go use the airline's website. And in some cases, again, by actually calling.
So while free stopovers are fun, that doesn't guarantee you're getting the same price. Kevin will explain that next. I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, and this is Consumerpedia, powered by checkbook.org.
If you like what you hear, we hope you'll consider being a Consumerpedia supporter by using the link at the bottom of the show notes to make a small contribution each month. This is Consumerpedia.
So if you're taking advantage of a stopover offer, you need to make sure that you'll pay the lowest fare for the total trip. Kevin, tell us how we do that.
Just because an airline won't charge you extra for a stopover, it doesn't mean it'll still have the lowest fare. I mean, this is really important. I mean, I love that so many airlines offer these programs. They're great, but don't assume they offer the lowest price for your trip. Often they don't. I mean, I've never booked a stopover fare trip, and one of the big reasons is that I've always found it less expensive to do other things, to travel to different places, or even to include that stopover in my itinerary, but not take advantage of these programs. When I was testing these 26 airlines' websites, I often found that the fare they quoted me with the free stopover was a lot more than what I could pay by doing the exact same trip with a different airline or a mixture of more than one airline. It's really important to keep in mind that ticket costs for regional flights within Africa, Asia, Australia, and Europe, they're typically quite inexpensive. So for example, one-way nonstop flights between major European cities, they typically cost less than like $50 or $60. So that means you can usually create your own inexpensive vacation with variety with stopovers without worrying about these airlines' policies. So again, it's just be sure to compare what you'll pay for the same trip with other airlines. Use your favorite comparison website. I like Kayak, but there are many others that can do the same work for you. You may find that, okay, I can do a stopover in Iceland and then continue on somewhere else in Scandinavia and then come back with a collection of airlines as opposed to using just Icelandic's stopover policy.
As you mentioned before, all the airlines on your list are foreign carriers. Is that because U.S. airlines don't have these stopover programs?
Yeah, that's right. So Hawaiian is the only U.S. carrier with a program. And its stopover program only works if you stop off in Honolulu on your way to a destination elsewhere in the Pacific, say Tokyo or something like that. For all other U.S. airlines, you can't stop off, say, in Delta or United or American's hub cities for more than 8 to 12 hours without paying for an extra ticket to your destination. So the same is true of British Airways, Air France, KLM, Lufthansa, and the 64 or so other airlines I didn't list in my article. And that's because they don't allow these planned stopovers. So, Delta, it still may strand you in Dallas for 4 days or something, but that's a different animal. That's not a stopover. That's just a delay.
In your list of airlines and policies, you include alliance members. The airlines with free stopover programs don't serve all U.S. cities, but you can still book through them. Talk about these alliance programs.
Yeah, I think this is important to keep in mind is, Qantas, for example, it doesn't serve any of the 3 D.C. area airports, but it's part of oneworld, which includes American Airlines and Alaska. So if I wanted to book a trip with a free stopover with Qantas, which again has this great program, I could still book it even though they don't serve DC. I mean, I'd still need to use Qantas' website to design my trip, and I'd likely find the first segment, on American or Alaska. I'd probably go to LAX and then onward from there on Qantas. And so the same deal goes for you, Herb. I mean, Iberia doesn't serve SeaTac, but you could still book a stopover trip with it. You go to its website, and when it prices it for you, it's likely going to route you to Madrid through Chicago or Philly on American because it's also part of oneworld, but you can still take advantage of its program, even though you're not starting out on an Iberia jet.
One more key point here. You only looked at programs for those booking with money, not miles or anything else.
Yeah, that's right. So many airlines we saw have more generous stopover policies if you're booking with miles. I think the best example is Air France and KLM. They don't have a free stopover program for regular fares, but if you book an award ticket at their website, and it's one big airline now, and their website for that is flyingblue.fr, when you go there, you'll see options to add stopovers in Amsterdam or Paris. And with them, you can book stopovers on your way to and your way back from a destination. So you could fly to Paris, then Prague, then Amsterdam, and then back home. And that would all be on just one round trip reward redemption. That's pretty cool. But I didn't, after 3 or 4 days of working on this, I decided not to just dig into all these mile rules because, most people don't have 100,000 miles sitting in their account and wouldn't care so much about those types of programs.
So straight ahead, tips from a frequent flyer on how to find the best fares and avoid the common pitfalls of booking online. This is Consumerpedia, powered by checkbook.org.
Consumerpedia Fast Facts. Americans have been traveling abroad more than ever this year. Where are they headed? Alliance Partners, the global travel insurance company, analyzed millions of flight itineraries for summer travel for its 2024 Travels Destinations Survey. Once again, Cancun, Mexico remains the top international destination. Another Mexican favorite, San Jose del Cabo, came in second, followed by Aruba. London, which is growing in popularity with Americans, moved up to the number 4 spot this year. Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic was number 5. Rounding out the top 10, Montego Bay, Jamaica, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, Turks and Caicos in the Caribbean. Paris at number 9 made the top 10 for the first time since 2018. The Olympics had a lot to do with that. And at number 10, Nassau in the Bahamas.
We're back with Checkbook's executive editor, Kevin Brasler. Kevin, you book a lot of flights for both work and vacation travel. Share a few tips with us. What are some of your top tips?
I don't know if this is a tip, but, I often get asked, how do you find low fares, especially when I'm traveling with my family. There's 4 of us. I want to keep costs down. And the answer is one that most people don't want to hear, and that is that I'm pretty much at least once a week check on fares for various trips I might want to take. I think it's really important. Tip number 1 in terms of keeping costs down is to remain as flexible as you can, especially about dates and destinations. There's all these reports that come out every year that say, the best time to book airfare is 63 days from when you plan to take your trip. And I'm telling you now, that's all nonsense, right? Mm-hmm. Airfare is governed by algorithms these days. I found good fares 11 months out, and I found good fares 1 week out. The key is just to remain as flexible as you can and just check prices periodically. A lot of these travel booking websites like Kayak and Google Flights and all the others really now, you can set up fare alerts. So if there's a trip you really want to take, you don't have to book it right then and there. You can just several months in advance tell it when prices get to this certain point, let me know, because now I know it's time to book. But in terms of this stuff of, 63 days out or 4 months out or whatever, that's all nonsense. I found prices all over the place. The other thing I do, and I think this is key also, is to really keep my destination options fluid if I can. So if the family wants to go to Europe, I try not to get just totally locked in on even one country. We can go to Munich or Prague, or maybe we'll go to Poland. Mm-hmm. Or we'll go to Southern Europe, Spain versus Italy versus Greece. And I try not to keep my gateway cities so locked in. I mean, we found great fares to Marseille, France, for example, as opposed to flying into Milan or Paris. The more flexibility you have, the better options you'll have in terms of low fares.
Sure, especially when you have 2 daughters who never want to go where you want to go.
Well, no, they only want to go places where their cell phones will work. That's all they care about anymore. Yeah.
Which is totally another podcast, which we talked about how using your cell phone when you're out of the country, you might want to check that out.
Yes, and it costs $10 a day each, and so that's why their cell phones don't work abroad, is because I don't connect them to international roaming because it's too much money.
One other bit of nonsense, and I think you'd agree, is all these articles, your best day to book is Wednesday, best day to book is Sunday at 2 p.m. That's a bunch of nonsense also, because it's all based on each flight and the algorithm of how many seats are sold in that plane.
Yeah, they're looking at, hundreds of thousands of flights over the course of a year and trying to pinpoint, okay, well, this was the date and time and day or whatever that the fares were lowest, but they're not much lower than the next day. The only kind of consistent success I found in terms of finding low fares is that, at least with American Airlines, I can tell you this, as soon as they publish a fare, as soon as it becomes available, and that's usually about 11 months out, sometimes the first fares that are there, because the plane is completely empty at that point, are among the lowest. But you can't count on that either. I mean, I've seen fares to London that were $1,100, and then later in the year they went down to $750. The other thing these days is that you have to understand that a lot of what's baked into your ticket price are taxes and fees. And so, the days of, being able to jet off to Paris for the weekend for $250, $300 round trip, those days are over just because the taxes and fees are so high now.
One more point, and it's really important. When you see the fares on the websites, the first thing that catches your eye, the very cheap fares, those are basic economy fares that have a lot of restrictions to them, and people have to realize that.
Yeah, you have to understand now that the entire airline industry, not just in this country, but worldwide, when you're searching a U.S. travel site, it's all just a bait and switch operation now. The prices they show you, those initial prices, those are not the prices you're likely going to want to pay because you're going to need to check a bag. You may want to pick a seat, especially if you're traveling with family. I mean, the extras just go on, but especially those basic economy fares, the biggest problem I have with them is you cannot change them. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to make a change to your trip these days, you don't have to pay change fees. But with the basic economy fares, you usually can't do anything with them. They're not refundable at all. They're not going to give you a trip credit if you change your mind. None of that. But the problem is the airlines show them up front and you see them, especially on these like bare bones carriers like Ryanair or Play Airlines, which is the one I mentioned. It's Iceland's kind of new carrier. It often shows me low fares, but then, when I actually want to pick a seat anywhere on the airplane, when I might want a meal or a bottle of water or bring a backpack with me, I find that it's more expensive than other options usually. The problem is just a big waste of time. You have to click through 4 times to figure out what you're actually going to pay for this airfare. Yep. What I do instead is I just remove it from my search options whenever I'm looking for airfare because I just don't want to deal with it.
Sure.
But the problem is even major carriers like British Airways, often what they're showing you are basic economy fares, and most of us don't want those. You can, on some of these websites, there's a section under cabin or something like that where you can remove those basic economy fares from your search. Kayak, I like it because it actually lets you say whether or not you're going to check a bag or not. But the problem is even those sites don't work perfectly because some of these airlines, for example, SAS, which is the big Scandinavian airline, it often somehow sneaks in these basic economy fares by calling them something like light or blue or whatever. And it's very confusing and it's unnecessarily so.
A lot of people headed to international destinations are often told, hey, you can save money on your flight by booking with a discounter. Can you? Are there any drawbacks to that?
Yeah, you can. And so these companies, you'll see them in search results when you're using, Kayak and Google Flights. The offer isn't coming from the airline. It's coming from some third party that's basically the airline is paying it either a commission to sell extra tickets or they've bought up a bunch of seats and they're selling them at a discount. It just depends on how their operation works. It's usually the former these days. The problem with these fares is, I've booked them. Sometimes they've worked out for me and they were fine and I did save a lot of money. But you have to know going in that you're going to be treated by the airline as its lowest priority customer. So one time I booked tickets for our family on British Airways. So the airline, British Airways, it changed our origination airport. Instead of flying out of Dulles, which is pretty convenient to where we live, it changed us to Baltimore, which is like an hour away. It's difficult to get to. Parking's more difficult. And it also meant that we were going to arrive at, not our optimal times, the times we had chosen. And there was nothing we can do about it other than cancel for a refund. And they can do that because the fare class that we got booked with British Airways allowed the airline to make those changes. We just didn't get a say about it.
Well, Kevin, I think I hear them announcing your flight, so we better let you run in before you miss taking off.
I wish I were going someplace fun this afternoon, but no, it's just back to work.
So before we go, let me suggest a few other travel-related Consumerpedia episodes you might want to check out. Number 62, The Travel Show 2024. Episode 60, Avoid a Big Cell Phone Bill When Traveling Abroad. Episode 41, Finding the Best Hotel Rates. Episode 38, Travel Tips from a Travel Expert. And Episode 17, How to Find the Best Deals on Airfare. A lot of great information there for you. And with that, we come to the end of this episode. We hope you'll rate it and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Remember, we release new episodes every other Thursday. Another way you can support this show is to follow us on Consumerpedia at Facebook and Instagram, and at My Consumerpedia on X, formerly Twitter. I'm Herb Weisbaum. Thanks for listening.
Consumerpedia is a public service of Checkbook.org. We're a unique nonprofit that helps you save money and make smarter choices. You can count on Checkbook to help you find the best services and avoid the worst, with local ratings that are accurate and unbiased. If you live in or around these 7 cities and haven't joined Checkbook yet, check us out. Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis-St. Paul, and Washington, D.C. To get your free 30-day subscription, go to checkbook.org/consumerpedia. If you like what you've heard, we hope you'll become a supporter by using the link at the bottom of the show notes to make a small contribution each month. Consumerpedia, empowering consumers to save money and make smarter choices.